It's this small radius where 4 disappearances at least took place within 5 years of each other.
Allegation in certain books that people go up there, that there's some sort of a Bermuda Triangle where people go up and get lost and they're never seen again.
I heard like the Bennington Triangle and the Bennington Monster, and how it's like the Bermuda Triangle. You go in and you don't come out, and Bigfoot lives up there.
And I've heard that if you wear red, then you usually disappear.
You know, there's been wild claims that 10 people disappeared without a trace.
And you could call it a ghost town because it was a civilization that did exist. And
there's not too many places that are this remote, this wild.
The scope of the Bennington Triangle lore has a little bit of everything. At one point or another, I've heard almost every kind of thing that you'll find in paranormal studies or folklore, all kind of, it's got Bigfoot, UFOs, I've heard rumors of cults and, Black Panthers, and, it's got a ghost town, it's got murder, it's got, a little bit of everything. So people are probably never going to find out for sure what happened to the people that disappeared.
First murder which took place in 1892, it was a drunken squabble between two of the transient loggers up there. The victim's name was John Crowley. He was 38 years old, and he got into an argument with Henry McDowell.
Henry McDowell was, I guess his real name was William Conroy. He went by a lot of different aliases. He was a really colorful character.
McDowell somehow, it depends on what version you read, hit him with a rock or a piece of firewood or something and knocked him out.
He came back, hung around for a while, and then when the guy died, he bolted.
Rode the rails and went to Canada and somehow ended up in South Norwalk, Connecticut, and he was tried and convicted and sent to Waterbury State Hospital. And he proved to be pretty canny because they let him work in the yard around the hospital at Waterbury, and he hid himself under a load of coal, railroad car, and took off, and nobody had ever seen him again. The other murder that took place, this was a gentleman named John Harbour who came from Woodford, substantial citizen, father of 4 children, and he was killed on the opening day of the first deer season Vermont ever held on a statewide basis, which was the 1st of October, 1897. And John Harbour was killed up in the Bickford Hollow section of Woodford. Nobody ever came forward. Nobody was ever charged or accused or tried or anything like that. And so the poor widow, she died something like 43 years later, never knowing who it was who had killed her husband. The Bennington and Glastenbury Railroad, which began in 1872 and ran for almost 9 miles from downtown Bennington, it almost defied gravity, the steepness of the pitch, to the South Glastenbury, what they call the forks in South Glastenbury, where the forks of Bowles Brook come together. There was a brief time before oil when charcoal was the fuel of choice. They built these huge brick charcoal kilns. Can only make charcoal where there's lots of trees. And there are lots of trees up there. Well, the point is that after the trees were all gone, the logging railroad was still there and went into bankruptcy, and they had a hard time, but they converted it to an electric trolley line, reinforced the rails for trolley cars, and those are the pictures you see of people going up there to Glastenbury on the trolley. The summer resort only functioned for one solitary summer, the summer of 1898. They converted the loggers' boarding house into a hotel. They converted what had been, I understand, the apartment house and company store into the casino where they served meals, and you could buy a trout supper there for $1.
It's kind of a strange story the way they made such a big attempt to make it a viable tourist area. When it became clear that there was nothing else to really keep the town going, because the mountain was just clear cut and there was no, lumber was not going to be a viable source. And
after the summer resort, summer of 1898, there was what they call a freshet, a flood in the fall of 1898, and partly because the all the trees had been clear cut. You know, there was erosion, and all the bridges were wiped out, and the rails were ruined. So that was the end of the summer resort. There was never a road there. There was only the railroad, only the trolley line. Those buildings just deteriorated and weren't used again.
You know, it all just descended into ghost town.
Glastonbury and Somerset are the only towns in Vermont that have ever been disincorporated. The town government stripped away from them. It got to a point where in 1936, when there was a cartoon, and believe it or not, by Ripley, that Glastenbury, Vermont has only three residents. Ira Madison and his wife and his mother make up the whole town, hold all the town offices. It was only a slight exaggeration, but it was basically true.
Then there's a story of Mitty Rivers, who was a hunter, and he likewise disappeared. After long searches for him, there's been no recovery of any clues as to what happened to him.
Mitty Rivers was in his 70s or late 60s. He was hunting up around the area that's called Hell Hollow, around Hell Hollow and Bickford Hollow, and he wandered off by himself, and he was last seen around like 4 o'clock in the afternoon and vanished without a trace. Some sources say that a couple of his bullets were found, but it's not really clear whether that's the case or not, so nobody really knows. It was the first huge manhunt that they had on the mountain looking for somebody, and there was National Guard and everything involved. They never found anything substantial. He was seen just before 4 o'clock, which is interesting because actually several of the disappearances, the people were last seen between 3 and 4 o'clock.
A theory that's often overlooked, something that has occurred to me while hiking around the southern part of Glastenbury in an area known as the Forks. That was the location of the Glastenbury Mining, Railroad, and Manufacturing Company. Not only did they have boarding rooms and houses for the workers, there were families that lived up there. There was a schoolhouse, there was a post office. It really was a little village. Obviously, associated with this sort of development, you need to have a well. My thought is that perhaps there's an old well that is the final resting spot of Mitty Rivers.
She went missing, I believe it was December 1st of '46, after she'd finished a shift at Bennington College in the lunchroom, and took off. She was observed walking Route 9, going down the Reservoir Road, or the road up to Woodford, and they have some campers that saw her and disappeared into the woods slightly after 4 o'clock, never to be seen again.
She was the Bennington College student who apparently had told her roommate she was going for a hike on the Long Trail.
The Paula Weldon case is probably the best documented of any of the disappearances. There's a pretty solid timeline of her exact whereabouts most of the day leading up to the time when she was last seen. She was described by her roommate as being in a little bit of a funk, in a strange mood, and her roommate had suggested to her that maybe she'd take a hike or a walk. The search was massive. Father was a pretty wealthy industrialist from Connecticut who immediately came up to Bennington and was heavily involved in the search the whole time. It was the first time a helicopter was ever used in a missing person search in Vermont. There was an enormous amount of press. It was in the local papers. It was in the New York Times. They searched every trail off of the Long Trail first, and then began doing helicopter sweeps of the whole Glastenbury area, and then down going south as far as Williamstown in Massachusetts. There was a lot of people that became really heavily involved. There was some state investigators that came down. It was literally like the biggest thing that had happened in Bennington in a very long time, at least.
Well, actually, I saw the case that one of the guys found down in the cellar at a state police office in Shasbury years ago, and it's a far cry from what they would do nowadays with a missing person case, but it was fairly comprehensive, and they didn't delve into the things that I would like to have delved into. Did they delve into family dynamics as much as we would in this day and age? I don't think so, but that tweaked my curiosity, and they didn't expound upon it, so we'll never know. I would have gone into such things as records at the medical facilities at the college, see if she was on antidepressants, etc.
The only substantial fact that came out of that entire episode was the establishment of the Vermont State Police.
And a person that's cold would probably try to find a fir tree or area where they could keep warm for the night, which would further hinder the problem of finding them because they'd try to cuddle up somewhere where they could maintain body heat.
The main two theories, I think, fall into her being killed and buried in one of, I've heard probably half a dozen different locations mentioned in Woodford, Bennington, and the Glastenbury area. There's a lot of different rumors about where exactly, and most of them are inconveniently in places that can't really be dug up so well, like under the power station in Woodford. And then the other theory that she ran off with a boyfriend. She wasn't known to have a boyfriend at the time. Her roommate didn't know anything about a boyfriend, and none of her friends had any idea who that might have been, but I tend to think, something happened to her and she didn't just run away. On the other hand, she was heading up, a pretty treacherous hike, in sneakers and a light jacket, and jeans, and so she was very unprepared for the elements. And there have been a lot of people that have gone missing up there, in the winter, and there's been a few, that have died that have been found later. But we're in such secluded spots. There's a lot of wilderness up there.
I would contend that I don't think she can be associated with Glastenbury. Yes, she was headed in that direction, but it was about a mile. She was about a mile away from the Glastenbury border. So, I think it was strictly coincidental that she disappeared a year after Mitty Rivers. My theory on it, no better than anybody else's theory, was that she'd had difficult relations with her father, and family relations were difficult, and that a boyfriend or a friend came along and had a rendezvous and picked her up. I don't have any proof on that, but at least that fits the theory that there's been no evidence. She's never been found, ever. If she were alive today, she could still be alive. She'd be in her late 70s, maybe.
It could have been a walking suicide where she just had it with everything and just said, I'm done with it, and walked into the woods, never to be seen again. The possibility exists, and was always talked about, that she was abducted, but the possibility of a person being seen walking into the woods right before dusk and then having a predator grab her at that last known spot going into the woods, that's pretty small. So I kind of discount that. She was 18, healthy human. You could, easily put on miles before you got fatigued. So sure, she is darn close to the town of Glastenbury when she went into the woods in Woodford. So she could have made it in there. And that is vast national forest in this day and age, and it's still a place you just don't want to be. So at this point, I think that this case is going to be forever a speculation as to what happened to her, and you'll never know.
Yeah, Jim Tedford was staying at the Soldiers' Home in Bennington. He was a veteran who lived there, and he had gone up to St. Albans, Vermont, to visit some family and his wife, who was still living at the time, but they didn't live together. He'd been reported as being really depressed and not really wanting to go back to the Soldiers' Home. The last time he was seen for sure was in Burlington. He got off the bus at a break, and somebody he knew ran into him at the bus station there, and he spoke with them. Said that he was on his way to Bennington and got back on the bus, presumably. By the time he was actually reported missing, it was at least a week after the fact, before the Soldiers' Home actually bothered to find out, call his relatives and find out if he was coming back, and then a few more days for the investigation to get going. So really, by the time the police were interviewing the bus driver and anyone on the bus, it had been almost 2 weeks and nobody really remembered anything. That one's probably been the most blown out of proportion in some sources, especially on the internet, because it's been stated that he was last seen just before Bennington, and that he had been sitting in his seat, and then all of a sudden they got to Bennington and it was completely empty. So I mean, it's gotten built up into sounding like he vanished into thin air.